Hello everyone and welcome back to Shadow Man Stories. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now, let's get you comfortable and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Dr. Catherine Ashford, but everyone at Grayson Highlands calls me Kit. I need to write this down while I still remember it clearly, while I can still tell the difference between what I saw and what I think I saw. The files I'm typing this into are encrypted, stored on 3 different drives, because what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible. 2 years ago, I would have laughed at someone telling me this story. I'm a wildlife biologist. Was a wildlife biologist. I have a PhD in cryptozoology from Virginia Tech, which basically means I study animals that might not exist. Bigfoot, lake monsters, things people claim to see but can't prove. My job was debunking these claims, showing people that what they saw was really a bear, or a log, or their own imagination playing tricks. I believed in science, facts, evidence you could measure and weigh. I'd spent 3 years writing papers about how people mistake normal animals for monsters. Crypto hounds, I called the believers. People who wanted magic to be real so badly, they'd see it anywhere. June 1996 was brutal hot. Even up in the highlands at 4,000 feet, where the wild ponies live and the air usually stays cool, temperatures hit the 90s every day. The drought was killing everything. Highland bogs that had been wet for centuries suddenly dried up overnight. The ponies stayed close to the few remaining water sources, which made my job easier. I was studying the herd behaviors, documenting how the drought changed their migration patterns. Simple work. Safe work. I'd been doing it for 2 years since my divorce, hiding up in the mountains with my notebooks and cameras, rebuilding my life one observation at a time. The park was quieter than usual. Too hot for most hikers. Just me, the ponies, and whatever was watching me from the tree line. I should have paid attention to how the ponies acted around Sirta, in areas. How they'd approach a water hole, then suddenly wheel away, ears flat, eyes showing white. I chalked it up to drought stress. Animals get weird when they're thirsty and scared. I should have noticed how quiet the birds got in some spots, how even the insects seemed to avoid certain clearings. I should have trusted my gut when I found the first pony. But I was a scientist. I needed proof. The mare was a chestnut, maybe 15 hands high. I'd photographed her the week before with her foal, both healthy and strong. Now she lay in a perfect circle of trampled grass 20 feet across. No blood, no obvious wounds, but something had arranged her legs in a pattern that hurt to look at. Not random, deliberate. I took pictures, measurements, samples. The scene was too clean, too organized. Mountain lions don't arrange their kills. Bears don't create geometric patterns. But what else could have moved a 900-pound horse? The tracks around the circle told a story I couldn't accept. They started as human footprints, bare feet, size 11 maybe, then changed mid-stride into something with pads and claws. The transition happened over 3 steps, like watching someone transform while walking. I made plaster casts, photographed everything from 12 angles. Checked my equipment twice, wondering if the heat was affecting my cameras. The evidence was impossible, but it was there. That night in my cabin, I reviewed the photos. In the background of one shot, barely visible in the tree shadows, stood what looked like a person. Tall, thin, watching me work. But when I enlarged the image, the figure's proportions were wrong, arms too long, stance too wide. I told myself it was a shadow, a trick of light and leaves. But I also locked my door for the first time since moving to the park. The next morning, I found 2 more ponies. Same arrangement. Same impossible tracks. This tit, me, the footprints led right up to my cabin door, circled it twice, then headed back into the forest. Whatever was out there knew where I lived. And it wanted me to know. It knew. Derek Young arrived on Thursday with enough camera equipment to stock a nature documentary. Professional photographer, 27 years old, thick Boston accent, and the kind of enthusiasm that made you tired just watching him. He'd driven down from D.C. after reading my preliminary report about unusual predation patterns in the park. "This is going to be huge, Dr. Ashford," he said, unloading telephoto lenses and motion sensors from his Jeep. "Real cryptid evidence documented by a credible scientist? We're talking National Geographic cover story." I should have sent him home. Should have told him the park was closed or dangerous or that I'd made a mistake in my report. Instead, I let him set up camp near Wilburn Ridge, where the attacks seemed centered. Derek had that confidence you see in people who've never been truly afraid. He talked about getting close-ups of whatever's doing this, like he was planning to photograph wedding portraits. When I tried to warn him about staying near the cabin after dark, he just grinned and patted his camera bag. "Don't worry, Doc. I've photographed grizzlies in Alaska, tigers in India. Whatever's out here can't be worse than that." He was wrong. I found Derek 3 days later at sunrise, lying in another perfect circle of trampled grass. No blood, no wounds I could see. But his skin had turned gray-white, like old paper, and when I touched his wrist to check for a pulse, his arm felt hollow, empty. The coroner later said massive blood loss, though they never found where the blood went. No puncture wounds, no tears in the skin. Just gone. Derek's cameras were still there, still running. Motion sensors, infrared triggers, the works. Thousands of dollars of equipment, untouched. But every memory card was blank. Every battery was dead. Even his backup power supplies had been drained. That's when I started believing something was very wrong. In Grayson Highlands. Something that understood technology well enough to disable it. Something smart enough to know that evidence was dangerous. The tracks around Derek's body were different this time. Still the same pattern. Human feet changing to animal paws. But now there were dozens of them. Like whatever did this had walked the circle over and over, studying the scene, learning from it. I called the state police, but what could I tell them? That something impossible had killed a photographer and stolen his blood? They took statements, filed reports, and chalked it up to a medical emergency. Heat exhaustion, they decided. Happens to hikers all the time. Only I knew Derek hadn't been hiking when he died. He'd been photographing something, and that something had been photographing him back. Amy Chen arrived the next week. Graduate student from UVA working on her thesis about folklore and wildlife interactions. 24 years old, black hair in a ponytail, always carrying 3 notebooks and a voice recorder. She wanted to interview me about the unusual animal behavior that had been reported. I tried to scare her off. Told her about Derek, about the dead ponies, about the feeling I got sometimes that something was watching from the forest. She just nodded and wrote it all down. "That's exactly the kind of psychological response I'm studying," she said. "How proximity to unexplained events affects scientific objectivity. It's fascinating." Amy was too smart for her own good. She started mapping the attack sites, looking for patterns, drew lines between them on a topographical map, and found they followed old Cherokee trails, connecting stone circles that had been there before European settlers arrived. "There's definitely something here," she told me on her 4th night in the park. "But it's not what people think. This isn't random. It's ritualistic. Kultu, real. Like something's following very old rules." That was the last conversation we had while Amy was still human. I found her at dawn in wolf form, lying in the same trampled circle. Pattern. Gray fur, yellow eyes that still held human intelligence, human terror. She was alive but trapped, consciousness locked inside an animal body that didn't fit. Amy tried to speak when she saw me, tried to form words with a wolf's throat and tongue. All that came out were whimpers and growls, but I could see her thoughts in those yellow eyes. She knew what had happened to her. She was begging me to help. I called the state veterinarian, but what could I say? That a graduate student had been turned into a wolf? They'd have me committed. Instead, I said I'd found an injured wolf that seemed unusually tame, possibly someone's escaped pet. The vet examined Amy, though I couldn't bring myself to think of her that way, and found nothing wrong. Perfect health, he said. Beautiful specimen. But when he tried to sedate her for transport to a wildlife facility, Amy's heart just stopped. The autopsy showed human DNA, human brain patterns, human teeth and bone structure, somehow compressed and reshaped into wolf anatomy. The vet quit his job the next week, moved to Florida, never spoke about the case again. But I kept Amy's notebooks, her research, her maps showing the pattern of attacks, and I started carrying a gun. George Wilson had been volunteering at Grayson Highlands for 15 years, 63 years old, retired postal worker, knew every trail and every wild pony by name. If something strange was happening in the park, George would have noticed. That's what I told myself when I asked him to help me investigate the attack sites. 2 people working together would be safer than 1 person alone. We'd cover more ground, watch each other's backs, maybe catch whatever was doing this. George agreed immediately. He'd been worried about the ponies too, he said. Noticed they were avoiding certain areas, acting spooked for no reason he could see. He brought his hunting rifle, a .30-06 he'd used for deer hunting since he was a teenager. Probably just a rabid bear, he said as we hiked up to Wilburn Ridge. Seen them do strange things when they're sick. Act almost human sometimes. I didn't tell him about Amy's DNA results. Didn't mention that the tracks showed bare human feet, not paws. George needed to believe we were hunting an animal. I was starting to suspect we were hunting something much worse. We set up camp near the stone circle Amy had marked as the center of the pattern. Ancient Cherokee site, she'd written in her notes. Ceremonial ground. The stones were arranged in a perfect spiral, each one carved with symbols that predated any known Cherokee writing system. George made coffee on a camp stove while I reviewed Amy's maps. She'd identified 12 attack sites, all connected by straight lines that formed a larger pattern around the stone circle, like spokes on a wheel or rays of a star. Your student was smart, George said, looking over my shoulder at the maps. Saw the connection nobody else did. Shame what happened to her. What did you hear about Amy? Same thing everyone heard. Hiking accident. Fell and hit her head, they said. Body was too damaged to recover. George stirred sugar into his coffee, not meeting my eyes. Course, that's not what really happened, is it? I stared at him. What do you mean? I mean, I saw her, Dr. Ashford. 3 nights ago down by Massey Gap. Saw her running with the wild ponies, except she wasn't human anymore. Gray fur, yellow eyes, but still wearing that blue backpack she always carried. My blood went cold. George, that's impossible. Amy is dead. You saw what it wanted you to see. George set down his coffee cup. Just like it wants me to see you right now, asking these questions, acting like you don't know what's really going on. George, you're not making sense. He smiled and his teeth looked too sharp. I've been watching you, kid. Watching and learning. You're very thorough in your research, very careful with your evidence. It's been educational. That's when I realized George's eyes had changed color. They'd been brown when we set up camp. Now they were yellow. Amy's yellow. The thing about shapeshifters, George said in Amy's voice, is we learn from everyone we consume. Derek taught me about photography. Amy taught me about folklore and research methods. George is teaching me about hunting. I ran. Behind me I heard sounds I can't describe properly. Bones breaking and reforming. Flesh tearing and reshaping. George's voice rising in pitch, becoming a howl of pain and transformation. I made it maybe 50 yards before something tackled me from behind. Not George anymore. Something with too many joints, too many teeth, but still wearing George's flannel shirt. Don't run, it said in Derek's Boston accent. I need to know what you know. About the patterns. About the old stories. About how to break the curse that binds me here. That's when I understood. This wasn't just a predator. It was trapped, looking for a way out. And it thought I might have the answer. The creature's grip on my shoulder felt like being held by a skeleton wearing meat gloves. Its breath smelled like wet dog and copper pennies. When it spoke, I could hear echoes of all its victims in its voice. I've been here so long, it whispered. Since the French traders came through Cherokee land. Since the medicine woman cursed me for taking her daughter. 200 years, shifting between forms, never able to stay human for more than a few hours. What do you want from me? You study cryptids, Dr. Ashford. You understand folklore. Tell me how to break a Cherokee curse and I'll let you live. I thought about Amy's research, about the stone circles and the ceremonial sites, about the patterns that connected everything. I don't know, I said, but I might be able to find out. The creature smiled with George's face and Amy's eyes and Derek's teeth. Then we have a partnership. You research the curse and I'll keep the other hikers away while you work. Fair trade? I nodded, knowing I was lying, knowing that whatever this thing was, I had to find a way to stop it. But first, I had to survive long enough to learn its weaknesses. The creature released me and stepped back. As I watched, it shifted forms again, becoming a perfect copy of myself. My height, my voice, my mannerisms. Don't try to run, Kit, it said with my mouth. I can be you better than you can now. I know everything you know, everyone you've talked to, everywhere you've been. If you betray me, I'll visit your friends at the university, your family, your ex-husband. It knew about Michael, about the divorce, about why I'd hidden myself up in these mountains. It had been reading my memories through Derek's blood, Amy's transformation, George's fear. How long do I have? I asked. 3 days, it said. Find me a way to break the curse, or I'll start visiting everyone in your address book. Then it walked into the forest wearing my face, leaving me alone with 3 corpses and the knowledge that something was out there impersonating me. I had 3 days to research a 200-year-old Cherokee curse, while something wearing my face hunted people in the park. 3 days to find answers in Amy's notes, in library archives, in conversations with tribal elders who might remember old stories. The Grayson County Library had a surprising collection of Cherokee folklore donated by families who'd lived in the area for generations. I found references to shapeshifters, to French traders, to medicine women who could bind spirits to the land, but nothing about breaking curses. On the second day, I drove to the Cherokee Cultural Center in North Carolina. An elder named Joseph Crow Feather listened to my story without interruption, his dark eyes growing more troubled with each detail. You're describing a skinwalker, he said finally, but not Cherokee. This sounds like something else, wearing our traditions like a stolen coat. What you're hunting is older than our people, older than the French. It just learned to hide behind our stories. How do I stop it? You don't stop something like that, Dr. Ashford. You contain it, trap it, make it someone else's problem. He pulled out a leather pouch filled with silver powder. This might slow it down, disrupt the shape-shifting temporarily, but the real weapon is knowledge. What kind of knowledge? Skinwalkers can only hold a shape if they understand the mind behind it. They read memories, learn personalities, become perfect copies, but they can't create new memories. If you can prove something only the real person would know, something that happened after they were copied, you can break the illusion. I drove back to Grayson Highlands with a plan that would probably get me killed. The creature was waiting at my cabin, wearing my face and reading my research notes. It looked up as I entered, smiled with my own mouth. Find anything useful? It asked. Maybe. The curse might be tied to the stone circles. If we can perform a counter-ritual at the original site, it might work. Show me. I spread out Amy's maps on my desk, pointing to the central stone circle. According to the Cherokee elders, the medicine woman who cursed you bound your spirit to this specific location. The circles act like anchors, keeping you tied to the highlands. The creature studied the maps with my eyes, traced the pattern of lines connecting the sites. And breaking the anchors would free me? In theory, but it would require a blood sacrifice. Someone who understands the curse, who's studied the patterns, someone like me. Convenient. The creature's smile was my smile, but colder. Lead the way, Dr. Ashford. We hiked up to Wilburn Ridge as the sun set behind the mountains. The stone circle looked different in twilight, older and more ominous. The carved symbols seemed to shift it in the fading light. Here's what I don't understand, I said as we entered the circle. Why haven't you tried this before? 200 years is a long time to be trapped. I needed someone who understood both the science and the folklore, someone who could read the old patterns and interpret them correctly. The creature touched one of the carved stones. Amy was close, but she didn't have your expertise in cryptozoology. She couldn't see the whole picture. And Derek? Derek just took pictures. Useful, but limited. The creature's voice was still mine, but I could hear echoes of its other victims underneath. You're different, kid. You have exactly the knowledge I need. I pulled out the silver powder Joseph Crow Feather had given me. Then let's get started. What's that? Consecrated silver, part of the ritual. I began sprinkling the powder in a circle around us. According to the Cherokee texts, silver disrupts negative spiritual energy. The creature took a step back as the powder touched its feet. That burns. It's supposed to. I continued spreading the silver, trapping us both inside the stone circle. The ritual requires both of us to be here, but it also protects against spiritual interference. The creature's face, my face, began to flicker. For just a moment, I saw its true form underneath. Something with too many joints, too many teeth, eyes like yellow fires in a skull made of shadows. What did you do? It snarled. And now its voice was its own. Something between human speech and animal howls. I learned the truth about you. I pulled out my digital recorder, the one I'd been carrying since Derek's death. You're not a Cherokee skinwalker. You're something else. Something that feeds on human identity. But you can only copy what already exists in your victim's memories. The creature lunged at me, but the silver circle held it back, steam rigcars, buzz from its skin where the powder had touched. I've been recording everything, I continued. Every conversation, every detail about my research, my thoughts, my plans. Things that happened after you copied me from Derek's blood. You know everything I knew 3 days ago, but nothing I've learned since then. The creature's form began to shift rapidly. Derek, Amy, George, me, back to its original shape. The silver was breaking its concentration, making it impossible to hold any single form. The Cherokee elder told me something interesting. You can't create new memories, only access existing ones. So you don't know that I've been in contact with the tribal council. You don't know about the silver, and you don't know that this isn't a ritual to free you. Then what is it? I smiled. A trap. The silver circle wasn't random powder. It was mixed with iron filings and blessed sage, created specifically to contain spirits that fed on human identity. The stone circle wasn't a Cherokee ceremonial site. It was much older, built by people who knew how to bind things like this creature. The Cherokee medicine woman didn't curse you, I said. She found you already trapped here and decided to keep you that way. The curse isn't what's holding you. It's what's keeping you from spreading beyond these mountains. The creature threw itself against the silver barrier, screaming in voices I recognized. Derek's voice, Amy's voice, George's voice, all twisted together in rage and desperation. You can't keep me here forever, it howled. The silver will fade. The barrier will weaken. You're right. I pulled out my satellite phone, a piece of equipment I'd acquired after Derek's death, something the creature couldn't know about. That's why I'm calling in help. Within hours, specialists arrived from the Cherokee Nation and the Virginia Department of Wildlife. They brought more silver, stronger barriers, equipment for containing dangerous spirits. The creature raged and pleaded and threatened, but the circle held. They moved it that night, transported the entire binding to a deeper location in the mountains, where it could be monitored and contained. Not destroyed, apparently that wasn't possible, but trapped securely enough to keep it from hunting again. That was 3 months ago. I submitted my final report to the Virginia Department of Wildlife, carefully edited to remove any mention of shapeshifters, curses, or Cherokee spirits. According to my official records, a rabid bear was responsible for the deaths. The animal was tracked and relocated to a secure facility where it could be monitored for public safety. Only a few people know the truth: Joseph Crow Feather and the Cherokee Tribal Council. Some specialists from the Department of Wildlife who deal with unusual animal behavior. The families of Derek, Amy, and George received substantial death benefits and carefully worded explanations about dangerous wildlife encounters. I left Grayson Highlands State Park. Couldn't stay there knowing what was buried in the deeper mountains, still alive, still hungry, held by barriers that might not last forever. The Park Service found me a position at Shenandoah National Park studying normal animals that don't shapeshift or steal memories or impersonate people. But I keep Amy's research, her maps, her notes about folklore and ceremonial sites. I've expanded her work, created a database of similar incidents across the Appalachian region. There are more things out there. Not many, but enough to matter. I get reports now, forwarded through channels that don't officially exist. Hikers who encounter animals that act too human. Photographers whose equipment mysteriously fails in certain locations. Park rangers who find evidence of impossible predators. Most of it turns out to be nothing. Misidentification, equipment failure, normal animals behaving unusually due to environmental stress. But sometimes, maybe one report in 50, I found in something that matches the pattern. Stone circles, missing time, tracks that change from human to animal mid-stride, people who act slightly wrong after camping in specific areas. When that happens, I make phone calls. The Cherokee Nation maintains a discrete department for cultural preservation. The Department of Wildlife has specialists who handle unusual animal behavior. Between them, they can usually contain the situation before it spreads. I'm not a cryptozoologist anymore. I'm something else now. Someone who knows that monsters are real, but also knows they can be stopped. Someone who maintains the barriers between the world people think they live in and the world that actually exists. My ex-husband called last week, said he'd been thinking about our marriage, about why I'd become so distant and paranoid in those final months. He wanted to try again, maybe take a camping trip together to reconnect with nature. I told him I was busy with research, too busy for camping, especially not in the mountains. Some places are better left alone. But I've been having dreams lately. Dreams about something wearing Michael's face, calling my name from outside my cabin window. Dreams about yellow eyes and two sharp teeth and the smell of wet dog and copper pennies. The thing in Grayson Highlands is contained, not dead. And it knows everything I knew when Derek died. It knows about Michael, about my family, about everyone I've ever cared about. The barriers are holding. The Cherokee specialists check them regularly. But barriers can be weakened by time, by weather, by people who don't know better disturbing the wrong places. Sometimes I wonder if I should have found a way to destroy the creature completely, but Joseph Crow Feather was clear about that. Some things can't be killed, only contained. Trying to destroy them often just makes them angry. So I keep my database. I answer the phone when strange reports come in. And I sleep with silver powder on my windowsill and a gun loaded with silver bullets in my nightstand, because I know now that the world is full of things that wear familiar faces and speak with trusted voices. Things that can become anyone you've ever known, anyone you've ever loved, as long as they've tasted your blood or stolen your memories. The beast of Grayson Highlands taught me that paranoia isn't a mental illness when the monsters are real. And they are real. They're just very good at hiding. End of encrypted file. Auto backup complete. Files distributed to secure servers at Cherokee Nation Cultural Center, Virginia Department of Wildlife Special Division, and University of Virginia Folklore Department. Access restricted to authorized personnel only. My name is Vincent O'Malley, and I need you to believe what I'm about to tell you. I know how it sounds. I know what people think when they hear stories like this. But I was there. I lived through it. And God help me, I'm still living with what I learned. Back in September of 1991, I worked as a park chaplain in Jefferson National Forest, up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia. I'd been doing the job for 8 years by then. It wasn't glamorous work, mostly helping lost hikers, doing historical talks about the Civil War sites, and counseling folks who came to the mountains looking for peace they couldn't find anywhere else. I wasn't always a park chaplain. Used to be a real priest back in the day, had a church, a congregation, the whole thing. But life has a way of testing your faith, and sometimes you fail that test. After my sister and her kids died in that car crash, I couldn't stand behind the pulpit anymore. Couldn't tell people that God had a plan when I didn't believe it myself. So I came to the mountains. Figured if I couldn't save souls, at least I could help people find their way out of the woods. The hurricane had hit us hard that September. Hurricane Bob tore through the whole region, leaving behind flooded creeks, washed-out roads, and mudslides that made half the trails dangerous to walk. I spent most of my days warning hikers away from the unstable areas and helping with cleanup crews. That's what I was doing the morning I found the battlefield memorial. Someone had been busy during the storm. The stone monument marking where Union soldiers died back in 1863 was covered in symbols I'd never seen before. Not spray paint. These marks looked burned into the rock itself. They formed weird patterns that hurt to look at too long, like your eyes couldn't quite focus on them right. I called the park office to report vandalism, but my radio crackled with static. Tried my cell phone next, but the screen just showed scrambled numbers. Even my watch had stopped working. All the electronics around that monument acted like they were cursed or something. I was copying the symbols into my notebook when I felt it, that feeling you get when someone's watching you. I looked around the clearing, then up at the trees. Nothing but broken branches and storm debris, but the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger. That's when I saw them. 2 red lights, way up in the tallest pine tree. At first I thought maybe it was sunlight reflecting off something metal left over from the hurricane. But the lights moved, tracked my movements like eyes, and they were too bright, too red, too steady to be natural. I stared up at those lights for maybe 30 seconds before my nerve broke. I packed up my stuff and got out of there fast. But as I walked away, I could feel those red eyes following me. Watching. Waiting. I should have stayed away from that place. Should have trusted my instincts and reported the whole thing as storm damage. But I've always been stubborn. And those symbols kept nagging at me. I'd studied a lot of history in my seminary days, knew Latin and Greek, even some Hebrew. But these marks were different, older somehow, like they came from somewhere else entirely. That night, I dreamed about the battlefield. In my dream, I stood where the monument was, but instead of forest around me, I saw the Civil War battle happening. Soldiers in blue and gray uniforms fighting and dying. And above it all, something dark circled in the sky, something with massive wings and burning red eyes. I woke up in a cold sweat, but I couldn't shake the dream. It felt too real, too important, like it was trying to tell me something. I went back to the monument the next morning, and I wasn't alone. Dr. Margaret Foster from the university was there with her camera and research equipment. Margaret was a Civil War historian who'd been studying our local battlefields for years. Sweet lady, about 40, with gray hair always pulled, back in a neat bun. She treated historical sites like they were sacred ground. "Vincent," she called when she saw me walking up the trail. "Thank God you're here, look at this." She showed me her camera. The pictures she'd taken of the symbols came out all wrong, blurry and distorted, with strange shadows that shouldn't have been there. But that wasn't the weird part. The weird part was what her metal detector had found. 37 pieces of metal buried around the monument, she said, excitement making her voice shake. All of them melted into impossible shapes. "Vincent, some of this metal is from the 1860s, but it's been heated to temperatures that shouldn't be possible without modern equipment." I helped her dig up a few pieces. The metal was twisted into spirals and curves that made my head spin to look at, and they were warm to the touch, even though they'd been buried in cold ground. "There's something else," Margaret said. "I've been having the strangest dreams since I started working here. Dreams about a disaster. A school bus full of children, caught in a mudslide. I can see it so clearly, Vincent. Like it's already happened." My blood went cold. I'd had the same dream. We worked together that morning, documenting everything. Margaret was thorough, professional. She took notes, measurements, soil samples. But as the day went on, she got quieter, more nervous. She kept looking up at the trees like she expected something to be watching us. Around noon, her equipment started acting up. The metal detector squealed with feedback. Her camera wouldn't focus. Even her pen stopped working. The ink just wouldn't come out. "This is impossible," she muttered, shaking the pen. "Everything was working fine an hour ago." That's when the wind stopped. I know that sounds strange, but you have to understand. We were in the mountains in September. There's always wind, All was. As the sound of leaves rustling, branches creaking, birds calling, but suddenly everything went silent. Dead silent, like the whole forest was holding its breath. Margaret looked up from her notebook. Do you hear that? I don't hear anything. Exactly. The silence stretched on for maybe 10 seconds. Then we heard it. A sound like massive wings beating the air. Slow, powerful wing beats that seemed to come from everywhere at once. The sound got louder, closer, but we couldn't see anything. Margaret's face went white. She grabbed her equipment and started backing toward the trail. We need to leave, she said, right now. I wanted to argue, to tell her we were being silly, but those wing beats were getting closer, and something in my gut, that same instinct that had kept me alive through 8 years in these mountains, was screaming at me to run. We packed up fast and hiked back to the parking area. Margaret threw her gear in her car like her life depended on it. I'm going back to town to process these samples, she said. Vincent, promise me you won't go back there alone. I promised. But I was lying, and I think she knew it. That evening, I sat in my cabin trying to make sense of what we'd experienced. I called Margaret's hotel to check on her, but she didn't answer. Figured she was busy with her research. I found out the next morning that Margaret Foster had died during the night. The police said it was some kind of brain aneurysm. Sudden, no warning, probably painless. But when they found her, her eyes were burned. Burned from the inside out like someone had held a blowtorch behind her eyelids. And clutched in her hand was a piece of paper covered in those same symbols from the monument. The paper had a message written on it. In English, in Margaret's handwriting, "The children will die unless someone listens." The police asked me about our day at the monument. But what was I supposed to tell them? That we'd heard invisible wings and felt like something was watching us? They'd have laughed me out of the station. But I knew. Deep in my gut, I knew that whatever killed Margaret was connected to that place. And I knew I had to go back. I wasn't the only one drawn to that battlefield. Word had gotten out somehow. Maybe from the police report. Maybe from Margaret's research notes. Within a week, we had treasure hunters and paranormal investigators crawling all over the site. Roy Gibson showed up first. He was a local metal detector enthusiast, about 55, with a beer gut and a Confederate flag bumper sticker on his pickup truck. Roy had been hunting Civil War relics for 20 years and thought he'd hit the jackpot. Heard there's melted metal buried all around here, he told me when I found him sweeping the area with his detector. Could be valuable. Could be historically significant. I tried to warn him off, told him about Margaret, but Roy just laughed. Lady probably had a heart condition, he said. Too much excitement finding all that buried treasure. Roy worked that site for 3 days straight. I checked on him when I could, but he seemed fine, happy even. His metal detector was finding things, lots of things. Pieces of twisted metal, melted bullets, bent bayonets. All of it warm to the touch. All of it shaped in ways that made your eyes water to look at them. On the third day, I found Roy's truck still parked at the trailhead after dark. His metal detector was lying on the ground near the monument, still beeping. But Roy was nowhere to be found. We searched for him all night, found him the next morning about 100 yards into the woods. Roy Gibson had been crushed, not by a falling tree or a rock slide, crushed by something that pressed down on him from above with tremendous force. The medical examiner said it would have taken something weighing several tons to cause that kind of damage. But there was nothing around him, nothing that could have fallen on him. And just like with Margaret, there was a note. This one was burned into the ground next to Roy's body. The children will die in 3 days. That's when Janet Riley showed up. Janet was a paranormal investigator from Richmond, 28 years old, full of energy and theories about supernatural phenomena. She'd heard about the deaths and wanted to conduct what she called a proper investigation. 2 people don't just die at the same location by coincidence, she told me. There's something here, something that's trying to communicate. I begged her to stay away. Told her about the dreams, about the feeling of being watched, about the equipment failures. But Janet was convinced she could make contact with whatever was causing the disturbances. She set up her equipment at the monument that evening. Electromagnetic field detectors, digital voice recorders, infrared cameras. Professional gear that cost more than I made in 6 months. For a while, everything seemed normal. The equipment worked fine. No strange readings, no mysterious sounds. Then the sun went down. I was watching from about 50 yards away when Janet's equipment started going crazy. Every device she'd brought began beeping, flashing, recording. She was excited at first, talking into her voice recorder about unprecedented supernatural activity. That's when the wind started. Not natural wind. This moved in patterns, swirling around the monument like it was alive. Janet's hair whipped around her face as she tried to adjust her equipment. The wind got stronger, lifting leaves and debris into the air in a tight spiral around the stone marker. I started walking toward her, but something made me stop. A shadow had appeared above the monument. It was hard to see in the dark, but it was big, bigger than any bird had a right to be, and it was shaped wrong, like someone had crossed an enormous moth with a human being. The shadow circles. At overhead, wings beating with that same slow, powerful rhythm we'd heard before. Janet was staring up at it, her face lit by the glow from her equipment. She wasn't afraid. She was fascinated. "It's magnificent," she whispered, her voice carrying clearly through the wind. "It's trying to show me something." That's when her head exploded. Not literally, but close. Blood suddenly poured from her nose, her ears, her eyes. She collapsed to her knees, hands pressed against her temples, screaming. The sound she made wasn't human. It was pure agony, the kind of pain that breaks your mind. I ran toward her, but the wind knocked me back. The shadow above us let out a cry that sounded like 1,000 birds screaming at once. Then it dove straight down at Janet. I never saw it hit her. There was a flash of red light, brighter than any lightning, and when my vision cleared, Janet was lying motionless next to the monument. The wind had stopped. The shadow was gone. Her equipment was melted into twisted heaps of plastic and metal. Janet Riley was still breathing when I reached her, but barely. Her eyes were wide open, staring at nothing. Blood trickled from the corners of her mouth. In her hand, she clutched a piece of paper. Another message, written in her own shaky handwriting. "Tomorrow, the bus, mile marker 12. Save them." She died in the ambulance on the way to the hospital. The doctors said it was a massive brain hemorrhage. They couldn't explain what had caused it. But I knew. And I finally understood what the thing at the monument was trying to tell us. It wasn't causing disasters. It was warning us about them. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my cabin with every light on, trying to figure out what mile marker 12 meant. There were dozens of mile markers throughout the national forest, but only one made sense given the dreams Margaret and I had shared. Mile marker 12 on the old mountain road that led to Jefferson Elementary School. I'd driven that road hundreds of times over the years. It wound through some of the most dangerous terrain. In the forest, steep drops, unstable slopes, areas where the hurricane damage had left the hillsides ready to collapse. If a school bus got caught in a mudslide there, it would be a death trap. At sunrise, I drove out to check the road. Everything looked normal, wet from the recent rains, but stable. I was starting to think maybe I was losing my mind when I saw the fresh cracks in the asphalt. Hairline fractures running right across the road at mile marker 12, the kind of cracks that meant the ground underneath was shifting. I called the county road department, but they said it would be at least a week before they could get an engineer out to assess the damage. I called the school, but classes had already started for the day. The secretary told me they had a field trip scheduled, a bus full of fourth graders heading to the Natural History Museum in town. They'd be coming back on the mountain road around 2 p.m. I had 6 hours. I drove back to the battlefield monument, though every instinct I had screamed at me to stay away. I needed answers. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. The place looked different in daylight, older somehow, like the trees had grown taller and the shadows had gotten deeper overnight. I walked up to the stone marker and placed my hand on it. "I know you're here," I said out loud. "I know you're listening. Show yourself." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the wind died, just like before. The forest went silent, and slowly, impossibly, a shadow began to form above the monument. It wasn't a shadow this time. It was real. The thing that descended from the sky was 8 feet tall, with wings that stretched 20 feet from tip to tip. Not bird wings, moth wings, covered in patterns that shifted and changed as you looked at them. Its body was humanoid, but wrong, like someone had stretched a person out and given them joints that bent in impossible directions. And its eyes. Its eyes were like staring into the heart of a fire. They burned with red light that seemed to reach right into your soul and judge what it found. There. When it spoke, I heard the voice inside my head rather than with my ears. "You came back," it said. "They always come back." "What are you?" I managed to ask. "I am the herald. I am the warning that comes before the storm. I see what is to come, and I try to save who I can." "You killed those people." "I gave them knowledge of what was to come. Some minds cannot bear the weight of prophecy." The creature's wings folded against its body as it landed on the monument. "But you are different, Vincent O'Malley. You have already lost faith once. You have room in your heart for terrible truths." I felt something pushing against my mind. Not painful, but insistent, like someone trying to show me a picture by pressing it against the inside of my skull. And suddenly, I could see it. The school bus, yellow and bright, coming around the curve at mile marker 12. I could see the hairline cracks in the road spreading, widening. I could see the hillside above the road letting go, tons of mud and rock sliding down like a brown waterfall. I could see 26 fourth-grade children trapped inside a bus that was slowly being crushed under the weight of the mountain. "Why show me this?" I asked. "Why not just prevent it? I cannot change what is to come. I can only warn. But sometimes, if the right person receives the warning, if they are willing to pay the price." The creature's red eyes fixed on mine. "Tell me, Vincent O'Malley, how much faith do you have left?" I looked at my watch. 1:47 p.m. The bus would be coming around that curve in 13 minutes. I ran. I drove to mile marker 12 faster than I'd ever driven in my life. The cracks in the road had spread, and I could hear ominous rumbling sounds from the hillside above. I parked my truck across both lanes, blocking the road, and waited. The school bus came around the curve at exactly 2 o'clock p.m. The driver, a man I knew from church, hit the brakes when she saw my truck. She rolled down her window and leaned out. "Vincent, what are you doing? We need to get these kids back to school." "The road's not safe, Mary. You need to turn around." "Don't be silly. I've driven this road 1,000 times. That's when the rumbling got louder. Loud enough that the kids on the bus started looking around nervously. Mary heard it too. Her face went pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. The mudslide hit 30 seconds later. It started as a trickle of dirt and small rocks, then became a torrent. The hillside above the road simply let go, sending thousands of tons of mud and debris cascading down. If the bus had been where it was supposed to be, it would have been buried completely. Instead, it was safe, 50 yards back from the slide zone. 26 children pressed their faces against the windows, watching in amazement as the mountain came down where they would have been. I stood next to my truck, watching the disaster I'd helped prevent, and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like maybe God hadn't abandoned me after all. Maybe he'd just been waiting for me to stop running from what he needed me to do. The official report blamed the mudslide on delayed effects from Hurricane Bob. Saturated soil, they said. Unstable geological conditions. Nobody questioned how I'd known to block the road at exactly the right time. Sometimes people don't want to look too closely at their good luck. I never saw the creature again, at least not directly. But sometimes, when I'm driving through the mountains at dusk, I catch glimpses of something large circling high overhead. And sometimes, late at night, I dream about disasters that haven't happened yet. I went back to the priesthood 6 months later. The bishop was surprised. I'd been out of active ministry for almost 10 years, but I told him I had found my calling again. I specialized in disaster counseling, helping communities prepare for and recover from natural catastrophes. Over the years, I've built a network of contacts throughout Appalachia. Park rangers, emergency responders, people who spend their time in the wilderness. They know to call me when they see red lights in the sky or find strange symbols burned into rocks. They know to take those sightings seriously, because the mothman, that's what the locals have started calling it, still appears before every major disaster in the region. The flood that wiped out half of Beckley in 1994, the mining accident that killed 18 men in 1997, the tornado that leveled the elementary school in Grafton in 2001. Each time, someone sees the red eyes. Someone finds the burned symbols. Someone has the prophetic dreams. And if they're strong enough to handle the knowledge, if they're willing to act on what they've learned, lives get saved. The creature was right about me. I did have room in my heart for terrible truths. Because living with the burden of foreknowledge, knowing that disasters are coming, that people will die, that you can only save some of them, that's the price of prophecy. But I've made my peace with it. I've learned to see the mothman not as a harbinger of doom, but as an angel of a sort. A dark angel, maybe, but an angel nonetheless. A messenger from whatever divine power watches over us, trying to give us the warnings we need to save ourselves. The dead can't be saved. Margaret Foster, Roy Gibson, Janet Riley. Their minds weren't strong enough to carry the weight of prophecy, but their deaths weren't meaningless. They were part of the message, part of the warning that led me to that road on the day 26 children would have died. I keep their pictures on my desk, along with pictures of all the people who've been saved because someone was willing to listen to the warnings. Hundreds of them now, men, women, children who are alive today because they were somewhere else when disaster struck. The network grows stronger every year. More people learning to recognize the signs, to trust the dreams, to act when action is needed. We can't prevent the disasters. That's beyond human power. But we can be ready for them. We can save who we can save. And sometimes, in the quiet moments before dawn, I think I can feel the creature's approval. A presence watching from the sky, red eyes that have seen too much but continue to witness, continue to warn, continue to hope that someone will listen. My name is Vincent O'Malley. I'm a priest again, and I believe in prophecy. I believe in angels, even the dark ones. And I believe that sometimes the most terrifying truths are also the most necessary. The mothman is still out there, somewhere in the mountains, watching, waiting, ready to warn us about the next disaster that's coming. And when those red eyes appear in the sky again, I'll be ready to listen. My name is Dolores Mackenzie, but everyone calls me Dolly. I've been watching over these Kentucky mountains from my fire tower for 15 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these woods could throw at me. Turns out, I was dead wrong. It was August 1978, and we were in the worst drought I'd ever seen. The trees looked like they were dying of thirst, their leaves hanging limp and brown even though summer wasn't over yet. From up here in my tower on Black Mountain, the highest point in all of Kentucky at 4,145 feet, I could see for miles in every direction. Usually that view made me feel safe, like nothing could sneak up on me way up here, 120 feet off the ground. I grew up in these mountains. My daddy worked the coal mines until his lungs gave out, and my mama died when I was 12. I learned to take care of myself early. That's probably why I like this job so much. Just me, my radio, and the endless green of Daniel Boone National Forest stretching out below. The tower's got everything I need: a bed, a tiny kitchen, weather equipment, and the big fire spotting scope that's my main tool. When I see smoke, I radio it in, and the fire crews come running. In 15 years, I've never missed a fire that mattered. But that morning, something felt different. I'd been tracking a weird heat signature on my equipment for 3 days. It showed up as a red blob on my thermal scanner, moving through the forest in ways that didn't make sense. Heat signatures usually follow logical patterns. Animals stick to trails, they move downhill toward water, they follow the wind. This thing was different. It moved uphill against the wind, and it seemed to travel in perfectly straight lines, even when that meant going through impossible terrain. I figured it was broken equipment. These old thermal scanners weren't exactly reliable. But then I started noticing other things. The birds stopped. It singing first. Then the squirrels disappeared. By the third day, I hadn't seen a single animal in the forest below, not even insects buzzing around my windows. That afternoon, I climbed down to check the base of my tower for the first time in a week. What I found there made my skin crawl. Tracks. Cat tracks, but bigger than any cat I'd ever seen. Each paw print was 8 inches wide, and here's the part that really got to me. They had 6 toes instead of 5. I'm not one to believe in mountain stories. My grandmother used to tell tales about the wampus cat, some kind of cursed creature that hunted these hills. But those were just stories told around the fire to scare kids. I'd lived in these mountains all my life, and I knew what was real and what wasn't. At least that's what I told myself as I climbed back up to my tower that evening. Those impossible tracks burned into my memory. The radio crackled to life at dawn. Fire Tower 7, this is base. We got a report of a missing rock climber on your side of the mountain. Tommy Walsh, 23 years old. Last seen yesterday afternoon on the north face. You spot anything unusual? I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the cliff faces below. The north face was popular with climbers because of its challenging routes and beautiful views. But in this heat, with no water sources nearby, it seemed like a dangerous place to be. Nothing moving down there, base, but something's got all the wildlife spooked. Haven't seen so much as a chipmunk in days. Copy that. Keep your eyes open. I kept scanning through the morning, but it was my thermal equipment that found him first. A human-shaped heat signature about halfway up the north face, perfectly still. Too still. It took the rescue team 3 hours to reach him. By then, I'd called in what they found over my radio, trying to keep my voice steady. Tommy Walsh was dead. But no, but from a climbing accident. His body had been arranged in a strange position, crouched like a cat, his arms and legs positioned just wrong. And his skin, parts of it were missing. Clean, tears, like something with very sharp claws had peeled it away. Animal attack, the rescue coordinator said over the radio. Probably a bear. But I'd seen bear attacks before. This wasn't that. Bears don't arrange their victims like artwork. 2 days later, Dr. Rebecca Stone went missing. She was a botanist studying drought-resistant plants in the area, camping alone about 2 miles from my tower. I'd talked to her on the radio just that morning. She seemed like a smart woman, experienced in the outdoors. They found her that evening. Her skull had been crushed, but not by any animal I knew. The medical examiner said later that the bite marks showed a jaw pressure impossible for any known predator in Kentucky. The spacing of the teeth was all wrong, too. Too wide, too sharp, too many of them. That night, I started keeping my rifle close. I also dug out my grandmother's old diary from my personal things. I'd never paid much attention to it before, but suddenly I wanted to read what she'd written about the wampus cat. The entries from 1918 made my blood run cold. She described the same pattern: animals fleeing the area, people found dead in strange positions, heat signatures moving in impossible ways. She wrote about something that looked like a giant cat, but walked on 2 legs sometimes, something with yellow eyes that could hypnotize its prey. Cursed Cherokee woman, she'd written in her shaky handwriting, caught spying on the men's sacred ritual. Cursed to be neither human nor animal, forever hungry, forever hunting. I'd always thought it was just an old story. But as I sat in my tower that night listening to the unnatural silence of a forest without animals, I started to wonder if some stories might be true. The radio crackled again. Fire Tower 7, we've got another missing person. Bill Harper, your maintenance crew chief. Last radio contact about an hour ago. My hands shook as I picked up the microphone. Bill was supposed to come check my generator tomorrow. He was a good man, careful and experienced. If something got him, I'll keep watch, I told them, but my voice came out as a whisper. Around midnight, I heard something that made my hair stand on end. A scream echoing through the valleys below. But it wasn't human. It was the sound a cat makes, but louder, wilder, and filled with an intelligence that no animal should have. The sound bounced off the mountain walls for what seemed like forever, and when it finally faded, the silence that followed felt even more wrong than before. I didn't sleep that night. I sat by my window with my rifle across my lap, watching the darkness and trying to convince myself that whatever was out there couldn't climb a 120-foot steel tower. I was wrong about that too. They found Bill Harper the next morning, hanging from a tree branch 30 feet off the ground. No animal could have put him there. His body was torn open, organs missing, but arranged with the same careful positioning as the others, like something was playing with its food. But the worst part was his face. His eyes were wide open, filled with absolute terror, like he'd seen something no person should ever see before he died. I was starting to understand that I wasn't just witnessing these attacks. I was being hunted. Each victim had been found closer to my tower. Tommy on the north face, 2 miles away. Dr. Stone, 2 miles south. Bill, only half a mile from my base. It was circling me, getting closer each time. That afternoon, my nephew Jake called on the radio. He was 19, home from college, and planning to go camping with some friends in the area. "Don't," I told him, my voice sharp with fear. "Jake, listen to me. Don't come up here. Don't bring your friends. There's something in these woods that's killing people." "Aunt Dolly, you're scaring me." "What are you talking about?" How could I explain it? That something from my grandmother's stories was real, that it was hunting people and arranging their bodies like some kind of sick art project? "Just trust me," I said. "Stay away from the mountains for a few weeks, please." But I knew Jake. He was stubborn like his daddy, and he'd probably think I was just getting old and paranoid up in my tower by myself. That night, the creature came close enough for me to see it. I was checking my equipment around 10 o'clock when I caught a glimpse of something moving on my thermal scanner. A heat signature at the base of my tower, much larger than human-sized. I grabbed my binoculars and my flashlight and looked down. Yellow eyes looked back up at me. Even from 120 feet up, those eyes seemed to glow in my flashlight beam. They weren't animal eyes exactly. There was too much intelligence in them, too much purpose, and they were locked on me like I was the most important thing in the world. The creature was massive, maybe 7 feet tall when it stood on its back legs. It had the body shape of a cat, but wrong in every way. Too big, too muscular, with hands instead of front paws. Its face was the worst part, mostly cat, but with human features mixed in. Like someone had tried to merge a woman and a mountain lion and created something that belonged in nightmares. As I watched, it opened its mouth and let out that same scream I'd heard the night before. But this time I could hear something else in it. It was trying to talk. The scream shaped itself into something almost like words, almost like my name. "Dolly." My blood turned to ice. It knew who I was. The thing started climbing the tower. I'd thought I was safe up here. Steel towers aren't meant to be climbed by anything without tools and training. But this creature moved up the metal framework like it was walking on flat ground. Its claws sparked against the steel as it climbed, and each spark lit up its yellow eyes for a split second. I grabbed my rifle and fired 3 shots, down at it. Each bullet hit. I'm a good shot, and it was a big target. But they didn't slow it down. If anything, they seemed to make it angry. It climbed faster, and its scream got louder. When it was about halfway up, something strange happened. I caught a glimpse of my own reflection in the window glass, and for just a second, the creature stopped climbing. It tilted its head, looking confused. Then a cloud covered the moon, my reflection disappeared, and it started climbing again. I ran to my radio. "Mayday, Mayday, this is Fire Tower 7. I need immediate rescue. There's something climbing my tower, something that's been killing people. It's almost at the top." Static answered me. Then, through the interference, I heard something that made me drop the microphone. My own voice was coming through the radio, but I wasn't talking. "Help me," my voice said through the static. "I'm hurt. I'm trapped. Please, come help me." The creature was using my voice to call for help. If anyone came to rescue me, they'd be walking into a trap. I looked down. The thing was only 20 feet below me now, close enough that I could smell it, a mix of sulfur and rotting meat that made my stomach turn, close enough to see that its claws were stained dark with blood. As it climbed closer, I noticed something else. My reflection kept appearing in different surfaces: the window glass, the metal parts of my equipment, even the chrome on my rifle. And every time it did, the creature would pause, looking confused and angry. That's when I remembered something from my grandmother's diary. She'd written about mirrors, about how the wampus cat couldn't stand to see its own reflection. It drove the creature crazy, broke whatever hold it had over its victims. I smashed the mirror from my medicine cabinet and held up a piece of the broken glass, angling it so it reflected the creature's face back at myself. The effect was immediate and terrifying. The thing let out a scream of rage and confusion, its eyes rolling back in its head. It lost its grip on the tower and fell 20 feet before, catching itself again. But now it was shaking, moving erratically, like it couldn't control its own body. I had found its weakness. But I was still trapped at the top of a tower with a supernatural killer, and dawn was still hours away. Thunder rolled across the mountains. A storm was coming, and that meant no helicopter rescue. I was on my own. The storm hit just after midnight, and the creature used the chaos to finish its climb. Lightning lit up the sky, and in each flash I could see it getting closer, 30 feet, 20, 10. Rain poured through my broken windows, soaking everything. The thunder was so loud I couldn't hear the radio anymore, couldn't call for help even if anyone was listening. The creature's claws scraping against wet metal was the only sound that mattered now. When it finally reached the top of my tower, we were eye to eye for the first time. Up close, it was even worse than I'd imagined. Its face was mostly human, a woman's face, but stretched and changed. The mouth was too wide, filled with rows of sharp teeth. The yellow eyes had slits like a cat's, but they held human intelligence, human anger. "You see me," it said, and its voice was like a woman's voice, filtered through broken glass. "You know what I am." I held up my piece of broken mirror, and the creature flinched away. But I was backed against the wall of my observation deck. There was nowhere left to run. "You're the Cherokee woman from the stories," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "The one who was cursed." It laughed, a sound like cats fighting. Cursed for wanting to know what the men knew. Cursed for being curious. Made into this thing, neither woman nor animal. Forever hungry. Forever hunting. Lightning flashed again, and in that moment, I saw something in its eyes that wasn't just anger. It was loneliness. This creature had been wandering these mountains for over a century, alone, driven by a curse it never chose. "I don't want to die," I told it. "Neither did I," it replied. "But wanting doesn't matter. The curse must feed." It lunged at me, claws extended. I rolled to the side, and its claws raked across the metal wall where my head had been a second before. Sparks flew, and some of them landed on my emergency flare box. The flares were designed to signal for rescue, bright red fires that burned hot enough to be seen for miles. As the creature spun around to face me again, I grabbed a flare and struck it against the wall. Brilliant red light filled the observation deck, and the creature screamed in pain. Not just from the light, but from what it saw, its own reflection, multiplied in every shiny surface, distorted by the broken glass I still held. But the flare wouldn't last long, and I couldn't stay up here. The tower was shaking from the creature's weight and the storm winds. If it came down, we'd both die. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I couldn't win this fight, but maybe I could survive it. The creature was confused by its own reflection, thrashing around the small space. I had maybe 30 seconds before it got control of itself again. I grabbed the emergency fire axe from the wall and smashed out the remaining windows. Rain and wind howled through the opening. Then I tucked the broken mirror into my shirt, took a deep breath, and jumped. A 120-foot fall should have killed me, would have killed me if I hadn't landed in the old pine tree that grew right next to the tower base. The branches broke my fall, but they broke my legs too, I hit the ground hard, both legs bent at angles that weren't natural. Above me, the wampus cat screamed its rage at the sky. But it didn't follow me down. Maybe it couldn't leave the high places during the storm, or maybe the broken mirrors I'd left up there were still confusing. I didn't know and didn't care. I just started crawling through the mud toward the road, dragging my broken legs behind me. It took me 4 hours to crawl half a mile. By the time the storm passed and the rescue teams found me, I was more dead than alive. But I was alive, and that was more than anyone else could say who'd faced that thing. They pulled me out of the forest at dawn and rushed me to the hospital in Lexington. Broken legs, hypothermia, and severe trauma, they said. The official report blamed the tower collapse on lightning strike during the storm. No mention of giant cats or Cherokee curses. But Jake never came home. They found him and his friends 3 days later, about 5 miles from where my tower used to be. All 3 boys were arranged in that same cat-like position I'd seen before. Jake's eyes held that same look of absolute terror. But worst of all, his hair had gone completely white. He was 19 years old, and he looked like an old man. Jake survived, technically. His body did, anyway. But something in his mind broke when he saw that creature. He hasn't spoken a word since they found him. Just stares out the window of the mental hospital, watching the mountains like he's waiting for something to come back for him. I got transferred to a ground-level position after my legs healed. Told everyone I was done with heights, done with being alone in the woods. That was partly true. But the real reason was simpler. I couldn't stand to look at myself in mirrors anymore. Every time I saw my own reflection, I remembered those yellow eyes looking back at me, and I remembered the loneliness I'd seen in them. The Forest Service quietly installed what they called wildlife deterrent systems around all the high-risk areas after that summer. Shiny metal panels that caught sunlight and created reflections. They told the public they were for keeping bears away from campsites. I know better. Every August, when the drought comes heavy and the animals start acting strange, I get reports. Heat signatures moving in impossible patterns. Hikers who swear they heard someone calling their name from the deep woods. Missing persons who turn up days later, arranged like sleeping cats, their hair gone white from terror. The wampus cat is still out there, still hunting, still alone. The curse doesn't end just because someone fights back. It just waits for the next fire season, the next drought, the next person foolish enough to climb too high in the Kentucky mountains. I'm 63 now, getting ready to retire. But I still monitor the radio traffic from the fire towers. Still listen for reports of animals fleeing an area, of heat signatures that don't make sense, of campers who hear voices in the dark calling their names. Because someone needs to remember. Someone needs to know what's really out there in the high places, waiting for the next curious soul who climbs too close to the sky. My name is Dolores Mackenzie, and I'm the woman who looked the wampus cat in the eyes and lived to tell about it. I just wish living through it had been enough to stop it. Every August, when the drought comes and the mountains get quiet, I remember those yellow eyes and that lonely, hungry scream echoing through the valleys. And I know it's still up there, waiting, still hunting, still cursed. My name is Marcus Donovan, but everyone calls me Mac. I need to tell you what happened in the mountains of West Virginia back in November 1985. The doctors here at the VA hospital say talking about it might help with the nightmares. They don't believe half of what I'm saying, but that's okay. I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't lived through it. I was 38 then, working as a backcountry rescue specialist for the Forest Service. 12 years of pulling lost hikers and hurt hunters out of the wilderness. Before that, I was a medic in Vietnam. The war messed me up pretty bad, but the mountains helped me find some peace. Out there in the quiet, with just the wind and the trees, I could almost forget the screaming. The Monongahela National Forest was my territory. I knew every trail, every cave, every ridge. Folks would joke that I was part mountain goat, but I liked it that way. The mountains made sense. People didn't. That November started warm, but the weather guys kept warning about an early blizzard coming down from Canada. Nobody listened much. We'd heard it all before. But I packed extra gear anyway. Thermite flares, emergency blankets, enough food for a week. In my line of work, you learn to expect the worst. The call came in around 3 a.m. on November 15th. Static-filled voice on the radio, breaking up bad. All I could make out was, hunting party, something wrong, Dolly Sods, help. Dolly Sods wilderness area, high plateau country, all bogs and weird plants left over from the Ice Age. Beautiful in its own way, but strange. The kind of place where compasses spin crazy and experienced hikers get turned around. I'd pulled 3 separate groups out of there that year alone. I loaded up my truck and headed out as the first snow started falling. Big, heavy flakes that stuck to everything. The temperature was dropping fast, from 45 degrees to below freezing, in just 2 hours. That should have been my first warning that something wasn't right. The hunting party had permits for a 5-day trip. 4 people: Carl Brennan, a local auto mechanic who knew the woods pretty well; Eddie Morrison, their guide from Charleston; Lisa Chang, a photographer from some nature magazine; and Pete Sullivan. Pete was the reason I took this call so seriously. He'd been my buddy in Vietnam, saved my life twice. We'd kept in touch over the years, went fishing sometimes. Good man. I parked at the trailhead and hiked in through the falling snow. My boots crunched on the frozen ground and my breath came out in white puffs. The woods were too quiet. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. In 12 years of rescue work, I'd never heard the forest so dead silent. After 2 miles, I found their base camp, or what was left of it. The camp looked like a bomb had gone off, not scattered by wind or torn up by bears, destroyed, tents ripped to shreds, coolers crushed flat, camping chairs twisted into metal pretzels. But here's the weird part. All the damage was in a perfect circle, maybe 12 feet across. Outside that circle, everything was normal. Inside it, everything was ruined. I called out for Pete and the others. My voice echoed off the rocks, but nobody answered. The snow was coming down harder now, big flakes that made it hard to see more than 20 feet ahead. That's when I found the first footprint. It was pressed deep into the mud beside their ruined camp, filled with fresh snow. Biggest footprint I'd ever seen. Had to be 18 inches long and 8 inches wide. 5 toes, just like a human, but way too big. The print was so deep it had cracked the frozen ground underneath. I knelt down and put my hand next to it for comparison. My hand looked like a child's next to that thing. Now I'd heard all the Bigfoot stories. Every bar in West Virginia's. I had some drunk telling tales about seeing ape men in the woods. Tourist nonsense, I always figured. Something to sell postcards and bring city folks down here with their cameras. But this print was real, fresh, and there were more. The trail of prints led away from the camp toward a rocky area where the Dolly Sods Plateau dropped off into a series of limestone caves. Each print was perfectly clear, showing the weight and power of whatever made them. Some were pressed so deep they'd gone through 6 inches of soil to hit bedrock. I followed the trail, my rifle ready. The temperature kept dropping. My thermometer read 15 degrees, but it felt much colder. My fingers were already getting numb inside my gloves. The prints led to the edge of a cliff where the rocks dropped down into a cave system. I'd been in those caves before. They went back for miles, full of tight passages and underground streams. Not a place you'd want to be trapped. That's where I found Carl Brennan. He was standing upright against a tree, but something was wrong with the picture. As I got closer, I realized what it was. Carl was frozen solid. Not just cold, frozen like a statue. His skin was blue-white, and ice crystals covered his beard and eyebrows. His eyes were wide open, staring at something I couldn't see, and his mouth was open in a silent scream. I touched his arm with my glove. He was hard as stone, frozen all the way through. But here's what made my blood run cold. It was only 15 degrees outside. Cold enough to hurt, sure, but not cold enough to freeze a man solid in minutes. Carl's rifle was on the ground next to him, but it wasn't right either. The metal barrel was twisted into a spiral, like someone with incredible strength had wrung it out like a wet towel. No animal could do that. No person either. I tried my radio, but all I got was static. The mountains often blocked signals, but this felt different. Every time I pressed the talk button, the static got louder, almost angry. That's when I heard the sound. It came from deep in the caves below, a low moaning that did, and sound like any animal I knew. It started quiet, then got louder, echoing off the rock walls. The sound made my teeth hurt and sent shivers down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. I should have turned around right then, should have hiked back to my truck and called for backup. But Pete was down there somewhere, and I couldn't leave him. In Vietnam, we had a rule. Nobody gets left behind. That rule had kept me alive, and I wasn't breaking it now. I found a path down into the cave system, following the footprints. The tracks were easier to see now because whatever made them had left patches of ice behind. Not normal ice. This stuff was thick and blue-white like the inside of a freezer. The caves were warmer than outside, maybe 35 degrees, but the ice patches stayed frozen solid. That wasn't natural. Ice doesn't stay frozen at 35 degrees. I turned on my flashlight and headed deeper into the caves, following the trail of massive footprints and impossible ice. The cave tunnels twisted and split like a maze. I'd been in here before, but never this far back. The footprints kept leading deeper, and the ice patches were getting thicker. My flashlight beam showed handprints on the walls. Huge handprints, pressed into the stone like the rock was soft clay. That's when I found Eddie Morrison. He was embedded in the cave wall, stuck in a sheet of ice that covered the rocks like glass. But Eddie wasn't dead. His eyes followed my flashlight, and his mouth was moving, trying to talk. He was alive, trapped in ice that should have killed him instantly. I tried to chip him out with my knife, but the ice was harder than steel. My blade couldn't even scratch it. Eddie kept trying to talk, his breath fogging up the ice from inside. I couldn't understand the words, but his eyes were full of terror. "Hang on, Eddie," I whispered. "I'm going to get help." But we both knew I was lying. There was no help coming. The radio was dead, the storm was getting worse, and something impossible was hunting in these caves. I kept following the tracks deeper into the mountain. The air was getting colder as I went, which made no sense. Caves are supposed to get warmer the deeper you go, but this was like walking into a refrigerator. My breath came out in thick clouds, and ice was forming on my beard. The tunnel opened into a big chamber, maybe 50 feet across. My flashlight beam showed more ice covering the walls and ceiling, and frozen in that ice were animals. Deer, bears, even a mountain lion. All of them perfectly preserved, their eyes still clear, like they'd just been hunting yesterday instead of God knows how long ago. In the center of the chamber, I found Lisa Chang. She was sitting upright, her camera still pressed to her face like she was taking a picture. The camera was frozen to her skin, and her finger was still on the shutter button. Ice covered her completely, but I could see her eyes moving underneath. Like Eddie, she was alive inside her frozen prison. The film in her camera had melted from some kind of heat, then frozen again in twisted shapes. Whatever she'd tried to photograph had burned her film just by being in front of it. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. Heavy, slow. Each step echoed through the chamber like a giant walking. I spun around with my rifle, but my flashlight beam showed nothing but empty cave. The footsteps stopped. Then I heard breathing. Deep, slow breaths that came out as visible clouds in the freezing air. Something big was in the chamber with me, but I couldn't see it. "Pete!" I called out. "Pete, are you in here?" The breathing stopped. The silence was worse than the sound. Then I saw the eyes, 2 pale blue dots, glowing in the darkness about 9 feet off the ground. They watched me without blinking, and I felt cold that went deeper than just temperature. This was the cold of space, of death, of things that should never exist. I raised my rifle and fired 3 quick shots at 2 hose eyes. The bullets sparked off the rock behind them, but the eyes didn't move. They just kept staring at me with ancient patience. A voice spoke from the darkness, deep and slow, like rocks grinding together. Warm. Blood. Warm. The temperature in the chamber dropped like a stone. My rifle froze in my hands, the metal so cold it burned my skin through my gloves. Ice formed on the walls around me, creeping out from where the creature stood. That's when I saw it fully. The thing was huge, maybe 11 feet tall, covered in white fur that looked more like ice crystals than hair. It stood upright like a man, but its arms hung down to its knees. Its face was almost human, but wrong. Too big, too old, with teeth like icicles and those terrible glowing eyes. But the worst part was that it wasn't just covered in ice. It was making ice. Wherever it looked, frost spread across the cave walls. When it breathed, the moisture in the air instantly froze and fell like snow. I understood then why Carl had frozen so fast, why Eddie and Lisa were trapped but still alive. This thing didn't just kill its prey. It preserved them, kept them fresh. The creature took a step toward me, and I felt my blood starting to slow in my veins. My hands were getting clumsy, and my thoughts were getting fuzzy. It was freezing me from the inside out. But I still had one trick left. I dropped my useless rifle and grabbed the thermite flare from my pack. Thermite burns at 4,000 degrees, hot enough to cut through steel. In the military, we used it to destroy equipment so the enemy couldn't use it. The creature saw what I was doing and let out a roar that shook ice from the ceiling. It charged at me, moving faster than anything that big should be able to move. But I was already pulling the pin on the flare. The thermite ignited with a bright white light that lit up the whole chamber. The creature screamed and stumbled backward, throwing its massive arms up to protect its eyes. Where the light hit its ice fur, steam hissed up like water on a hot stove. I held the flare between us, like a torch. And for the first time, the thing looked afraid. It kept backing away from the heat, and I could see its ice armor starting to melt. Underneath was scarred black skin, old and leathery, like something that had survived since the dinosaurs. "That's right," I said through chattering teeth. "You don't like the heat, do you?" The creature spoke again, its voice like an avalanche. "Cold. Always cold. Since the ice came, need warmth. Need blood." I understood then. This thing was old, older than human history. It had survived the ice age by going to sleep in these caves, waking up only when it needed to feed. And now it was awake again, hungry after years of sleeping. But I still didn't know where Pete was. "Where's my friend?" I demanded, waving the flare. "The fourth man?" The creature pointed one massive claw toward a side tunnel I hadn't noticed before. "Deep, safe, warm still." I backed toward the tunnel, keeping the flare between me and the monster. It followed at a distance, like a cat stalking a mouse. The heat from my flare was the only thing keeping it from rushing me. The side tunnel led to a smaller chamber, and there was Pete. He was unconscious but not frozen, lying on a bed of pine branches. The creature had been saving him for last, keeping him warm and alive. Pete's eyes opened when I shook him. "Mac? What the hell?" "No time to explain. Can you walk?" He nodded and struggled to his feet. I gave him my backup flashlight and told him to stay close. We had to get out of these caves before the flare burned out. The creature was waiting for us in the main chamber. It had moved back, but its eyes never left us. Lisa and Eddie were still trapped in their ice prisons, still alive, still watching us with desperate hope. "We can't leave them," I said. "Mac, we can't carry them out of here." "I know." I pulled out my last thermite flare, and it would burn for about 3 minutes, long enough to melt the ice around Lisa and Eddie, but not long enough to get all of us out of the caves alive. The creature would freeze us before we made it to the surface, but I couldn't leave them to be preserved forever in this monster's freezer. I lit the second flare and threw it at the ice wall where Eddie was trapped. The ice hissed and steamed, and within seconds, Eddie fell forward, gasping and shaking, but alive. The creature roared and charged at us. Without the heat to keep it back, it moved like lightning. I pushed Pete toward the tunnel entrance and yelled, "Run!" The thing's claws raked across my back as I dove after them. The cold hit me like a hammer, and I felt my blood starting to freeze in my veins. But we were in the tunnel now, running for our lives through the darkness. Behind us, the creature's roars shook the whole mountain. Rocks started falling from the ceiling, and I realized the old cave system was collapsing. The thing's anger was literally bringing the mountain down on top of us. We ran through falling rocks and choking dust, Eddie stumbling between Pete and me. My hands were so cold I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, but we kept moving. The entrance was just ahead, a circle of gray light in the darkness. We burst out of the caves just as the whole system collapsed behind us. Tons of rock crashed down, sealing the tunnels forever. The creature's final roar was cut off by the rumble of falling stone. But the cold had gotten to me. I looked down at my hands and saw that 3 fingers on my left hand were black with frostbite. I couldn't feel them at all. The rescue helicopters found us 2 hours later. The storm had passed and the sun was shining on fresh snow. We must have looked like hell. 3 half-frozen men babbling about ice monsters in the caves. The official report said we'd been caught in an extreme weather event that caused the cave-in. Carl Brennan and Lisa Chang were listed as victims of exposure and hypothermia. The twisted rifles and impossible ice formations were explained away as geological anomalies and pressure damage from the collapse. Eddie Morrison survived, but he couldn't remember anything that happened in the caves. The doctor said it was trauma-induced amnesia, and maybe that was a blessing. He went back to Charleston and never worked as a guide again. Pete remembered everything, just like I did. We talked about it once over beers at a bar in Beckley. He asked me if I thought the thing was really dead, buried under all that rock. I told him I hoped so, but I didn't believe it. Things that survive for thousands of years don't die from a few tons of stone. I lost those 3 fingers to frostbite, just like I knew I would. The doctors at the VA hospital did what they could, but the cold had gone too deep. I learned to work with 7 fingers, but I never went back to mountain rescue. Couldn't handle the cold anymore. I moved to Arizona after that. Desert country, where it's always warm and the air is dry. I still have nightmares about those glowing eyes and that voice like grinding stone. Sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat thinking I can hear that deep breathing in the darkness. But the worst part is what I learned from a park ranger friend of mine last year. He told me that every winter, when the temperature in the dolly sods drops below 0, the ice formations in that area get bigger, thicker, like something underneath is still breathing, still waiting. The area is quietly restricted now during extreme cold weather. For public safety, they say. But I know the real reason. Some things are too old and too patient to stay buried forever. And when the next ice age comes, and the scientists say it will eventually, that thing will be ready. It's probably down there right now, sleeping in the cold darkness, dreaming of warm blood and the taste of fear, waiting for winter to come back and stay. My name is Marcus Donovan, and this is what happened to me in the mountains of West Virginia. The doctors here at the VA don't believe most of it, but they can't explain the scars on my back or why I can't stop shaking when the temperature drops below freezing. Sometimes, late at night when the desert wind is howling, I think I can still hear that voice calling from the darkness. Warm. Blood. Warm. And I know that someday, when I'm old and weak and the desert sun can't keep me warm anymore, it's going to come looking for me. But until then, I'm staying right here where it's hot and dry and nothing can freeze. Nothing at all. My name is Ezekiel Hawthorne, but most folks call me Zeke. I'm writing this report on my last day as a park ranger, 37 years after what happened at Cataract Falls. Some things you can't forget, no matter how hard you try. Some things follow you home and nest in your dreams like black birds. Back in October 1963, I was 29 and green as spring grass. 6 months into my first ranger job at Great Smoky Mountains National Park. I had a geology degree from the University of Tennessee and thought I knew everything about rocks, trees, and the way mountains worked. I was wrong about a lot of things back then. My wife Sarah had died 2 years before in a car accident, leaving me with our baby daughter, also named Sarah. My grandmother on my mother's side was Cherokee, but I'd always figured her stories were just old tales meant to scare kids into behaving. Stuff about spirits in the woods, creatures that looked like people but weren't, things that hunted when the leaves turned red. Raven mockers, she'd whisper on cold nights. They steal the years right out of you. I thought it was nonsense. I was a man of science. The Cataract Falls area sits in the remote backcountry, about 8 miles from the nearest road. You have to hike in on an old Cherokee trail that winds between ancient burial cairns, stone piles the Cherokee built centuries ago to mark sacred places. Most tourists never make it that far. The ones who do usually stick to the main trail. October that year was different. The leaves turned all at once, like someone had set the whole mountain on fire. Orange, red, yellow, colors so bright they almost hurt to look at. But there was something else too. Something wrong. The ravens were acting strange. I first noticed it on October 15th, checking campsites near the falls. There had to be 50 ravens perched in the trees around the old burial cairns, all of them acing the same direction. They weren't making normal bird sounds. They were quiet, watching, waiting. When I walked closer, they didn't fly away. They just turned their heads and looked at me. Their eyes were too bright, too knowing. One of them opened its beak and made a sound that wasn't quite a caw. It sounded almost like Cherokee words, like my grandmother's voice. I shook my head and kept walking. Ravens are smart birds, everyone knows that. They can mimic sounds. Nothing supernatural about it. That was my first mistake, thinking I could explain everything away. 3 days later, I got the radio call that changed everything. Bob Martinez, the head ranger, sounded shaken up, and Bob never got shaken up about anything. "Zeke, I need you to hike out to Cataract Falls. We got a body." "What kind of body?" "The kind that doesn't make sense." I grabbed my gear and headed out. The trail felt different that morning, quieter, like the woods were holding their breath. The ravens were there again, more of them this time, following me from tree to tree. Every few minutes I'd hear that sound again, like Cherokee words I couldn't quite understand. I found the other rangers standing around something covered by a tarp, about 20 yards from the biggest burial cairn. Nobody was talking. Deputy Sheriff Coleman was there too, looking pale as winter. "Show him," Bob said. They pulled back the tarp, and my stomach dropped to my boots. It was an old woman, had to be 90 years old. Her skin was like dried paper, stretched tight over bones. Her hair was white as snow, thin and brittle. Her clothes hung loose, like they'd been made for someone twice her size. "Helen Morrison," Deputy Coleman said. 73 years old from Knoxville. Came up here yesterday with her family for a picnic." I stared at the body. "You sure about the age?" "Positive. Got her driver's license right here. Picture was taken 6 months ago." He handed me the license. The photo showed a plump, cheerful woman with brown hair and smooth skin. She looked maybe 60, not 90. "Where's her family?" I asked. "Back at headquarters, scared out of their minds. They say they left Grandma resting by the falls around noon yesterday. When they came back 2 hours later, they found—" He gestured at the tarp. "This." I knelt down and looked closer. Her fingernails were long and yellow, like they'd been growing for years. Her teeth were loose in her skull. This wasn't just death. This was extreme old age, compressed into hours. "Doc says natural causes," Coleman continued. "Heart failure. But Zeke—" He lowered his voice. "I've seen a lot of bodies. This ain't natural." That's when I heard it clear as day. A raven in the tree above us opened its beak and spoke in Cherokee. "Novi Gadohi. Your soul is good." My grandmother had taught me enough Cherokee to understand basic phrases. Ravens don't speak Cherokee. Ravens don't speak at all, except to make bird sounds. I looked up. The raven was staring right at me with eyes that glowed red in the afternoon light. "Did you hear that?" I asked Bob. "Hear what?" I pointed at the raven. "That bird just spoke Cherokee." Bob looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Ravens make all kinds of sounds, Zeke. You're probably just rattled by the body." But I knew what I'd heard, and deep in my chest, something cold started growing. My grandmother's stories weren't just stories. Something was hunting in these woods, something that had been here long before any of us. Over the next 3 days, we had 2 more deaths. each one stranger than the last. Jim Bradley, a park volunteer, went missing on a day hike. We found him the next morning near another burial cairn, aged to a skeleton with bits of skin still clinging to the bones. His park uniform was rotted through like it had been buried for decades. Sam Ridge, a Cherokee guide who'd worked the park for 20 years, lasted longer. We found him still Breton, hing, but barely. He looked like he'd aged 40 years overnight. His hair had gone white, his face was carved with deep wrinkles, and his hands shook like autumn leaves. Before he died, he grabbed my arm and whispered, "The raven mocker is feeding again. It's building strength for something big." Then he was gone, just like that. His soul seemed to leave through his mouth like a puff of cold air on a winter morning. That night I called my mother and told her not to bring little Sarah to visit like we'd planned. Something in my voice must have scared her because she didn't argue. The deaths were happening faster now, and always near the burial cairns. The ravens were multiplying too, hundreds of them gathering in the trees, watching, waiting. And they were all talking, not in English, in Cherokee. Old Cherokee, the kind my grandmother spoke when she was telling the ancient stories. I started carrying a notebook, writing down what I could understand. The hungry one wakes. Soon, soon, soon. Fresh ears to steal. The keeper of souls returns. On October 26th, I saw it for the first time. I was checking the area around Sam Ridge's death site when the temperature dropped 30 degrees in about 10 seconds. My breath started fogging, and frost appeared on the ground even though it was 70 degrees that morning. The ravens all went silent at once. That's when I knew something was coming. It stepped out from behind the largest burial cairn like it had been waiting there for hours. Maybe it had been waiting there for years. 12 feet tall, maybe taller. Skeleton thin, with arms that reached nearly to the ground. Its body looked human, but wrong. Too long, too sharp, covered in skin like old leather. But the worst part was its head. A human skull, but bigger than any skull should be. Empty eye sockets that somehow still saw everything. And sprouting from its back, enormous raven wings that blocked out the sun when they spread. It moved without sound, gliding over the ground like it was floating. In one of its long-fingered hands it carried what looked like a bag made of human skin. The raven mocker. My grandmother's stories had been true all along. It saw me watching and turned its skull head in my direction. When it opened its mouth, hundreds of voices poured out. Old voices, young voices, the voices of everyone it had ever killed. "Zeke Hawthorne," it said, and every voice spoke my name at once. "Half-blood son of two worlds, your Cherokee soul calls to me." I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The thing started walking toward me, and with each step I felt years draining away from my body. My joints ached, my back bent forward, my hair started turning gray. Then, from somewhere deep in my memory, I heard my grandmother's voice. "White sage smoke blinds the spirit stealers. Always carry white sage." I fumbled in my pack and found the small bundle of white sage she'd given me years ago. I'd kept it more for sentiment than belief. My hands were shaking, old hands now, but I managed to light it with my Zippo. The smoke rose between me and the raven mocker, and the thing let out a shriek that sounded like 100 people dying at once. It staggered backward, clawing at where its eyes should have been. The aging stopped. My body snapped back to normal like a rubber band. The creature faded into mist and was gone, but its voice echoed through the trees. "You cannot protect them all, Keeper's grandson. I grow stronger with each soul I take. Soon I will feast on what you love most." That's when I knew little Sarah was in danger. The thing knew about my daughter. It knew about my grandmother. It had been watching, planning. I had to end this before it came for my family. I spent that night researching everything I could find about raven mockers. The Cherokee legends were all consistent. These creatures were once Cherokee sorcerers who sold their souls for immortality. They feed on life force, stealing years from the living to add to their own existence. They can control ravens, phase between the spirit and physical worlds, and they're almost impossible to kill. Almost. There was one ritual, one my grandmother had taught me when I was young, a soul-binding ceremony that could trap a raven mocker in one place, preventing it from hunting. But it required a blood sacrifice from someone with Cherokee heritage, and it could cost the person performing it decades of their own life. On October 30th, despite my warnings, my mother brought little Sarah to the park anyway. "Zeke, you're scaring yourself with old stories," she said. "Sarah needs to see her daddy, and we've had this trip planned for months." I should have insisted they leave. I should have driven them back to town myself. Instead, I let them stay in the ranger quarters, thinking I could protect them. I was wrong. That night, the ravens came for us. They surrounded the ranger station, hundreds of them, covering every tree, every roof, every surface. Their red eyes glowed like coals in the darkness, and they all started speaking at once. "Give us the child. Give us the keeper's blood. Give us the fresh years." The windows started rattling. The temperature inside dropped to freezing. And then the raven mocker came walking out of the forest, bigger than before, more solid, more real. It had been feeding for 2 weeks, growing stronger with each stolen life. Now it was ready for the final feast. "Ezekiel Hawthorne," it called, and its voice shattered every window in the building. "Bring me the child and the old woman. Their Cherokee blood will make me strong enough to hunt for another 100 years. My mother grabbed little Sarah and backed into the corner. "Zeke, what is that thing?" "A mistake," I said, pulling out my white sage. "A mistake our people made a long time ago." The sage smoke filled the room, but this time it barely slowed the creature down. It was too strong now, too fed on stolen life. It reached through the smoke with those impossibly long arms and grabbed my mother by the throat. I watched in horror as she started aging. Her brown hair turned white, her smooth face wrinkled like a dried apple. Little Sarah was crying, reaching for her grandmother as the raven mocker drained away her years. That's when I knew what I had to do. I pulled out my knife and cut my palm, letting Cherokee blood drip onto the floor. Then I started the soul-binding chant my grandmother had taught me, the one I'd thought was just another story. "Spirit of hunger, spirit of theft, I bind you to this sacred ground. By my blood, by my years, by my Cherokee soul, I command you to feast no more." The raven mocker dropped my mother and whirled toward me. "You cannot bind me, half-blood. I am eternal." But the chant was working. I could feel it pulling at the creature, dragging it toward the burial cairns outside. The thing fought back, trying to enter my body, to possess my soul instead. For a moment, we were connected, and I saw everything it had done. Centuries of murder, thousands of stolen lives, and endless hunger that could never be satisfied. It had been the Cherokee sorcerer named Uktina's Shadow, who had made a deal with dark spirits during the time of troubles, trading his humanity for power. "I offer you a trade," I said through gritted teeth, feeling the creature's claws tearing at my soul. 10 years of my life to bind you to the burial ground. Take my years willingly given, and be trapped there until the mountain falls. The raven mocker paused. Freely given life force was more powerful than stolen years. It was a bargain it couldn't refuse. "Done," it hissed. The aging hit me like a lightning bolt. My hair went gray, my face lined, my back bent with sudden arthritis. 10 years gone in 10 seconds. But the binding held. The creature let out one final shriek and was sucked backward through the broken windows, pulled inexorably toward the burial cairns. Outside, every raven in Touche. Forest fell dead at the same instant, dropping from the trees like black rain. My mother recovered, though she kept some of the gray in her hair. Little Sarah was fine, too young to remember much of what happened. The Park Service officially blamed the deaths on a rare aging disease outbreak, some kind of exotic fungus that caused rapid cellular deterioration. They closed the Cataract Falls area to hiking and quietly restricted access to the burial grounds. I stayed on as a ranger for 37 more years, but I never went back to those cairns, not once. Every October, though, I could feel something stirring out there. The raven mocker was bound, not dead, and binding spells weaken over time. I learned Cherokee medicine from the tribal elders, studied the old ways my grandmother had tried to teach me. I established a cultural liaison program between the Park Service and the Cherokee Nation, making sure the burial grounds stayed protected and respected. But mostly, I watched and waited. Because here's what I learned in those woods. Some hungers are too old and too deep to ever really die. They just sleep, waiting for the bindings to weaken, for someone to make a mistake. Every year around Halloween, hikers report strange things near Cataract Falls, ravens that speak in human voices, cold spots where no cold should be, the smell of ancient death drifting through the trees. And every year, I file reports that no one reads, warning about things no one believes. Tomorrow I retire, and someone younger will take my place. Someone who probably thinks old stories are just stories. Someone who might not know that when the ravens start talking Cherokee, it's time to run. I'm writing this as a warning, a record, a plea. The raven mocker is still out there, bound but not beaten. Each death anniversary it grows a little stronger. Each October, the binding grows a little weaker. Someday, maybe not for decades, maybe not for centuries, but someday, it will break free. And when it does, it will be hungry. Hungrier than ever. So if you're ever hiking in the Smokies and you hear a raven speaking words you don't understand, if you see stone cairns covered in black feathers, if the temperature drops 30 degrees for no reason at all, turn around, walk away, don't look back. Some things are better left sleeping in the mountains.